All right, so now we have our empty scene. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reference in my set. So I'm going to go to my publish folder. And I'm going to grab, I'm working in Fog Forest. So I'm going to reference that in. F. It's a very big set. What you're going to see here are the trees. And then these were the 3 marker points that I placed in the scene just so that I know where the mocap is supposed to start in case there's any crazy offsets or weirdnesses, so I can check to make sure the data exported properly. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reference in my soldier, and he's going to be placed at 0. All right, and then I'm going to reference in my now cleaned up animation. And the reason I'm referencing it in is because inevitably what we're going to do is we're going to connect it to my soldier, and then we're going to bake the keys from the mocap down to the soldier, and then we'll unreference it. So we won't need to worry about it at that point. So I'm gonna grab that one. And you're gonna notice that he's way back here. But if I start moving, I make this like, I think it's like 1800. There he goes. All right. Now, for the motion matcher thing to work and connect properly, you really kind of want them in their default T pose or their default A pose before you move into the motion capture. In other words, so this is kind of like his 0 rest pose, his natural rest pose. This is one of the reasons I exported it out of Unreal, because I wanted to make sure it was in this, because it makes it easier to do the connection. Then I'm going to essentially grab Sydney's movement thing here, and I'm going to move him as close to the mocap as I possibly can. In fact, I'm going to try to line him up right over top of him. The reason I'm doing this is because when the motion capture matcher from Advanced Skeleton hooks up, it's going to it's going to put the motion capture on it based off of where he is in the scene. And so what I want is I want it to be exactly where it is. And not exactly, I mean, get as close as you can. All right, so I've got him pretty close. I feel pretty good about that. So now I'm going to launch this version. I'm using version 6. Even though this is a 5 rig, I'm using 6 because the mocap matcher works better. So I click on that, and it gives me this. And then underneath Anim is this thing called mocap matcher, and you click it. And he's got templates preset set up, and we're using Mixamo. And when you do that, it shows you, I'm going to connect the root to the hips, the spine to spine 1, the chest to spine 2. This is, so the motion capture data, which is going to be this, spine 2's motion capture data is going to go to the chest on the advanced skeleton. Well, the chest is this joint right here. So it's possible that I may want to change or try a couple different, because you'll notice I might want actually this one to be spine 2. So we're going to take a look at where spine 1 and spine 2 is on the Mixamo skeleton and see which lines up closer to which control. I may need to change this. But for now, we'll come back to that. For now, what we're going to do is we're going to select this guy and hit detect from selected, and it's going to essentially give me my precursor, your prefix. All right. So now I've got that. It says import mocap skeleton, select mocap skeleton, scan mocap skeleton. So when you hit scan, it essentially does the same thing. Now it says scale the mocap skeleton to match your character. Well, it already does match my character. So this would be like if you had mocap skeleton that was like different proportions or things like that. So I deliberately got the data already on Sydney so that I would have less trouble here. Then it says like, go to the start of your animation and like 0 it out. So if I go to the very beginning and I hit 0 out, watch what this does. And so what it essentially does is it puts all of the joints at 0. So now it's 0 rotation, 0 translation. And the idea is that what you would do now is then you would move these joints into place to line up with all your other joints so that it's all dead exact perfect. Okay. But I'm not going to do that because he's already pretty much lined up. So you can see there's like a little discrepancy here, right? With where the joints are between the two skeletons. And so sometimes what it takes, to get it to work, or to feel right, is you got to match it, look at the motion on your skeleton, and say, oh, does it feel right? And if it does, great. If it doesn't, then you need to make adjustments to it. So when you look at that is my skeleton's neck joint. That's just the soldier's. This is Mixamo's neck joint. So if I want this rotation to actually to line up as best with this possible, then I want to get them close. All right. So I'm going to show you what it looks like before I go back and redo this. All right. So let me turn it back on. All right. And then if I just say, okay, I'm happy with that. I haven't moved anything, but I'm happy with it. And I'm going to set my rig to FK. Let me turn the curves back on so you can see what happens. And then I'm going to connect it. You're like, okay, sure, it's great. Well, notice when he starts to move. And so what you want to look at now is, I'm going to hide him, and I'm going to pay attention to see how you're getting a little bit of weirdness on the shoulders there. The bend and the spine doesn't look quite right. So, but general movement looks pretty good for a walk. All right. So once you've got it, great thing is when it's in that pose, and you can say, oh, okay, I'm going to come and disconnect it, and that's just going to break it again. So now it's separated. You ain't got to worry about it. And then I can come back here, the polygons. Now notice this is spine 1. That is spine. All right. That is my root. Those are my hips. So think about what's going to happen when it bends. If this motion is bending from here or translating from here, this is translating from there. There's a pretty large difference. So you can move this around, but the second you do that, like you could hold X, or I think it's X, hold X down, and is it X or is it V? Oh, it's V. And it'll snap it. So I can snap to that, but now look what it's done to the rest of the skeleton. It's totally offset it. So now once you have that set, in theory, what you should be able to do is come over here and snap, snap, snap. Right? You're thinking, oh, this is going to be great. Well, it might work. Probably should have snapped that first. See? Always work down chain. So now I say, okay, what is this? That's spine 1. What is this? That's spine. So it's going to be spine to spine 1. And it's going to be spine 1 to spine 2. And spine 2 to chest. Now, this is up for debate whether you move these all the way forward or not, because the Mixamo, look what it did. It may cause some weird deformation. So I'm going to leave my shoulders. Maybe what I'll do is I'll leave my shoulders there. But I'll put these online. Now the fingers are actually kind of important because there is mocap data on these fingers. So getting them closer is important. Again, always start with your higher chain. All right, that's pretty much well connected up. See what it did to the head? So let's see what happens when I connect it. Still a little wonkadoodle, but again, there's subtle differences between the two of them. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm just going to do a standard connect, but it's worth checking on this. And then what I'm going to do next is repine these and see what happens. Here we go. Now, if you disconnect your skeleton there, it's going to keep it in that pose. And then, so you want to make sure you go all the way back to 0 before you do the disconnect. Very, very important. That can make things a little bit more difficult. Okay, so I've got my scene now reconnected, or I've got them all set up, ready to go. First thing I'm going to do is save this. And I'm going to save it up in a mocap clean area, version 2. Okay. And now I've got these guys ready to go. He's lined up with the mocap data. And you'll see the mocap data walk off. Wink, wink. Okay. I'm going to go to 0. I'm going to launch this guy from version 6. You should see something like this. And I'm going to go to Anim, mocap matcher. Scroll down. Going to grab my guy, detect from selected. Done, 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 done. I'm going to set my rig to FK. Okay. And before I connect, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to triple check my names again. So this time I know I want the root to the hip. I want, this is advanced skeleton. So advanced skeletons, spine 1, which I believe is that one. I want spine 1 to go to whatever this is, which is spine. So I'm going to change that. Spine 1 to spine. Okay. So I want not chest. I want spine 1 to go to spine 2. So I'm going to change this to spine 1. And I'm going to change this to spine 2. Okay. Now, this is spine 2 on the mocap skeleton. That is chest. I'd probably want to include that inside this. Well, it doesn't have a space for it. What do I do? Well, you can add a joint. So you can come in and say add joint. And you say on advanced skeleton, I want the chest joint. Make sure you spell it correctly. And I want that connected to spine 2. Yep, that's correct. All right. Now that I have all of that, I'm going to save it again because I want to be able to come back to this. It's lined up the way I want it. I hit connect. I'll show you the previs. You can the difference in where his shoulders are. So that clavicle placement is a real gnarly issue that I end up cleaning this up in my pose pulling. So, which is not that big of a deal. You'll also notice like his arms aren't exactly where they need to be. They're pretty close. Not exactly. And this is mostly because I didn't like dead zero out the skeleton. So for whatever it's worth. But I've got now I actually have my animation hooked up on my character. Let's get him over here so you can actually see some of the capture data. And so this was actual Move AI capture data. And blended down, but you're like, oh man, is he stepping through the ground? Yeah, he might be. In fact, he is. And so one of the things that you can do, although in the shot you don't ever see his feet, but we're going to clean this stuff up. But in order to do that, we've got to essentially bake it. We've got to bake all of this animation down onto my rig and then remove this other one and then clean that animation data up. That's next step.